Hi, and welcome to the Black Ponder. I'm Neil Trotter. I'm glad you could tune in today because we're going to be talking about something, a philosophical work that's very important, very influential, very critical, and that is Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason. Are you ready? Because this is going to be really fun. This is going to be a fun ride, a philosophical ride. So I hope you're ready because we're going to have a lot of fun with this one. Now, many intellectuals, scholars, academics in philosophy, they would pose the argument that the critique of pure reason is one of the greatest philosophical works of all time, if not the greatest philosophical work of all time. Now, is it the greatest philosophical work of all time? I wouldn't put it that far up. But if you were to pose that argument to me, like, hey man, this right here, this is the greatest philosophical text ever written, I would be like, yeah, I understand where you're coming from, man. Because Immanuel Kant is talking about things that are very important and are very relevant to this day. And I'm just gonna go ahead and start off with some quotes, because there's this one quote where he basically breaks down exactly what he talks about throughout the entire book. Those transcendental questions, however, which go beyond nature, would nevertheless remain unanswerable, even if the whole of nature were revealed to us. For it is not given to us to observe even our own mind with any intuition but that of our inner sense. In it lies the mystery of the origin of our sensibility. The relation of sensibility to an object and the transcendental ground of that unity are no doubt far too deeply hidden for us, who can know even ourselves only by means of inner sense, that is, as appearance, and we shall never be able to use the same imperfect instrument of our investigation in order to find anything but appearances over and over again, eager as we are to seek the non-sensible cause of these appearances. What renders this critique of conclusions drawn by means of mere acts of reflection useful is that it shows distinctly the nullity of all conclusions with regard to objects compared with one another, solely in the understanding, and that it confirms at the same time what we have so strongly insisted on, namely that appearances, though they cannot be included as things in themselves among the objects of the pure understanding, are nevertheless the only objects in relation to which our knowledge can possess objective reality. That is, where intuition corresponds to concepts. So I said a lot there. So in case you missed it, what Immanuel Kant, let me give you an example. Let me use this book, right? Now, let's not even focus on what the book is actually about. Let's talk about the object of the book. Now, let's look at this book. What is this book, right? What is it? Like, you got the cover. It's got a front cover. All books have a front cover. You might be like, oh, this front cover is kind of, it's kind of boring. Just got this old white guy in the front cover. You might think like, wow, it's pretty big. Got a lot of text. It's over 600, almost 700 pages. Text is small. I'm not. This is boring. I don't like it. Somebody like me will be like, oh wow, wow, a lot of text, beefy, got a lot of ideas. Yeah, I like this. But this is a book, right? Pages, cover, back cover, front cover. This is a book. But that's not actually what a book really is in reality. Like in reality, if we want to talk about the physical reality of it, really what this book is a collection, a clump of particles, clumped together to form some object, some piece of matter that I'm holding in my hands. If we really want to talk about the reality of what this actually is, we got to start talking about that, the quantum mechanics of it, right? Now, we could talk about that all day, but we as humans can't really fully conceptualize what that actually is, the quantum mechanics of what this is. Like, we don't really see particles coalescing together to form this. We're not really seeing that. We just see pages and paper with ink on it. That's really what we see. So there's a difference between how we perceive something and what something actually is. And Immanuel Kant is saying that we need to understand that truth to apply reason in a meaningful way. Hence, that's pure reason. And he critiques that. It's a very straightforward title, Critique of Pure Reason, because that's exactly what he's doing. I first encountered this idea when I took a philosophy class in college, like very basic philosophy class. And the teacher was just giving a summary of very important philosophers. She was just going down the line. And eventually she went to Immanuel Kant. And she basically said what I just said using about the book. But she used like a water bottle instead. She was like, yeah, this is a water bottle. I drink it. It's very refreshing. But that's not really what the water bottle is. It's, you know, this clump of matter, particles, etc., etc. And, you know, I wasn't impressed when she was saying that. I thought she was trying to be cool or something. So I raised my hand and made a comment like, okay, that's fine, Professor. That's what you're talking about. But if you're saying that we're only limited to our perceptions and there's no way we actually can fully comprehend what that something actually is, is that what the reality, what that something actually is that even important? Is that really worth talking about? I mean, should we even be concerned with that since we're unable to fully comprehend exactly what it is? Right? Isn't the reality ultimately our perception because that's what we're only limited to? And teacher, you know, the professor, she was like, well, the problem with that type of thinking is that you start to form logic and judgments and assumptions based off of things that aren't true, based off of falsehood. And so your reasoning, the foundation of your reason has a very weak base, and you're not really able to use reason effectively. And then she just went on to the next philosopher, and I wasn't satisfied. I'm like, could you elaborate a little more? But she had a curriculum to focus on, and she had to skip to the next philosopher, and I was unsatisfied. But thinking back, she was right. You know, she was right. Let me explain to you why she was right, and at the same time, we'll talk about more in depth about what Immanuel Kant is talking about in the Critique of Pure Reason. So let's use that age-old example back in the times of old school days when people used to think the center of the universe was the Earth. You know, nowadays we think of we think back at those times, and a lot of people would say, how could somebody think the Earth is the center of the universe? I mean, what that doesn't even make any sense. Why would somebody think that? But when you really think about it, if you didn't have the technology as they did, you're standing on Earth. It's not moving. It's stationary. You look up in the sky, and everything seems like it's rotating around the Earth. You know, like, oh wow, stars, they're moving. I see the same star. They're just circling the Earth. The sun is always moving around the Earth. The moon is always there. It's just kind of moving. Everything is moving, but the Earth is staying the same. So my perception is the Earth is not moving, and everything else is moving around the Earth. Therefore, the Earth must be the center of the universe. So if we only allowed our perception to dictate our idea of what reality is, we would still be thinking like, oh, I guess the Earth is the center of the universe. Now you could argue like, well, really it's the advancement of technology, right? Because people were able to look through telescopes and see things in new ways, and it altered their perception. But that wasn't really the case. What happened was people made leaps in their mind. You know, they kind of thought outside the box, like maybe the Earth is in the center of let's say the Earth is not the center. Based off of that, how would the universe operate? And let me make observations based off of that and see what happens. So that's a perfect example right there of, okay, you only limit your reasoning off of your perceptions, you're going to get some false conclusions. Let's take this really far. Let's take this to the next level. Let's get a little controversial even. Let's use this example of race, right? You know, I'm a black person, African American, you know, you're white. You know, that guy over there is Asian, that dude over there is Hispanic. Oh, that guy over there is Polynesian. Therefore, I'm this, that, and the other thing, and this person has to be that, and this. And this person over there is that. So we make these assumptions based off of, you know, the example I'm using is race, right? And we actually use this idea of race, and we it's normal for us to kind of take it too far. We look at somebody, we see the color of their skin as a little bit different from ours, and we assume that person is different from us. They operate differently than we do, almost to the point where this person is almost maybe even a different species. I mean, we're not saying that, but that's kind of what we're thinking. But to kind of like differentiate people based off race is kind of almost the same thing as like differentiating zebras based off of their arrangement of the stripes. You know, oh, those zebras over there, their stripes are more horizontal, therefore they are this, that, and other thing. And those zebras over there, their stripes are more vertical. So because of that, they do this, that, and other thing. But really, the zebras all act the same, right? We as humans just happen to have this trait where, we have various colors in our skin based off of melanin and, chemistry and genetics and so forth and so on. But that honestly has little to do with that people actually are, And I'm not talking about like culture. I mean, that's a different thing. And you could make the argument like, well, culture kind of depends on race. And I would argue that race actually depends more on culture, right? And I'm not saying that, there's definitely a difference between African American culture and even like, let's even say Mexican American culture is different from Mexican culture. It's just people who live in Mexico, that's different. And again, there you go. You got a limited perception. Like, somebody will look at, let's say you put a Chinese person and a Japanese person together, and a lot of people would assume, oh, they're the same. They must operate the same. They're all Asian. But no, you're limited to your perception. They look the same, therefore no, but maybe that Japanese person might act very differently from that Chinese person. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that they're both Asian. It's just that they're just two different people. Now, we're conditioned to kind of think this way. We're conditioned by society, but also humans are kind of programmed to think based off of categories. Due to our evolutionary conditioning. I mean, part of the reason why the human species is successful, if you want to look at it on an evolutionary level, one of the reasons is that we're able to categorize things quickly, and it's helped us survive. So we're also conditioned in that way, and society takes advantage of that automatic response and kind of creates all this ill logic and judgments and conclusions based off of these type of perceptions that aren't really based off of reality. So what I'm getting at is what we perceive somebody as is very different from what somebody actually is. You might look at me and say, oh, this is a black man. What the hell is this guy doing talking about philosophy, right? Or you might even be impressed, like, whoa, this guy's black, he's talking about philosophy, right? And the name of my title is a Black Ponder, and I just did that to be funny. I get a good laugh doing that. But really, is it that remarkable that I'm talking about philosophy and I'm black at the same time? Not really. I mean, you could argue like, well, historically black people, this, that, and other thing, and I'm not saying those things are not important, and there are definitely discrimination that exists that really affects people and holds them back. I'm not saying that's not the case. That's definitely the case. It is impressive when somebody who is oppressed based off the restriction that society places on them, they rise above that. That's very impressive. But I would say my argument is those restrictions are based off of perceptions that we make about objects that are rooted in our senses that have nothing to do with what people actually are, and that holds us back. That's the problem. That's what we need to realize, and that's what Immanuel Kant is talking about. I really like philosophy. The way you perceive me, the way you look at me, like, oh, this guy doesn't look like he should like philosophy, but I do, and that holds me back. Well, it doesn't really hold me back, but it holds society back because it holds philosophy back, right? Because now philosophy can't advance because we have this preconception of what philosophy is based off of our senses. And this is what Immanuel Kant is talking about in my view. Now, is Immanuel Kant, was he really going this way with what he was discussing these ideas? Probably not, but I think you could take his ideas and apply them to this very prevalent problem that we have as a society, really. And let's take another example. You look at women in the workplace, and this is common knowledge, right? You got a manager or some sort of business executive that is a woman. It is often the case that the woman is not making as much as a man is in terms of salary. Why is that? Again, we would argue like, well, it's a discrimination thing. But I would take it a step further and say like, what it really is that we don't perceive of a woman to be successful in like a corporate environment, making like decisions that affect, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. Like, that's not really what a woman's good at. Why is that the case? Because we're limiting our judgment, our reasoning based off of these perceptions that aren't rooted in what something actually is. That woman might be extremely good at running that corporation, but we say, oh, woman, not in corporate society, better in more lovey-dovey household type of things, right? And I feel like that's one meaningful place you can apply Immanuel Kant's philosophy, what he's talking about in the Critique of Pure Reason, to advance human society, quite frankly. Check out what he's saying here. What I maintain is that all the difficulties which we imagine to exist in these questions, and with which, as dogmatic objections, people wish to give themselves an air of deeper insight into the nature of things than the common understanding can ever claim, to have rest on a mere illusion. This illusion leads them to hypothesize what exists merely on thought, and to accept it in the same quality as a real object outside the thinking subject. In other words, they take extension, which is nothing but appearance, for a property of external things that subsist even apart from our sensibility, and take notion as the effect of these things taking place actually in itself and independently of our senses. So again, to review, what something actually is different from how we perceive something to be. And also, we're unable to fully comprehend exactly what that something actually is. So should we give up? Like I was commenting with the philosophy teacher. So we say, well, we're limited only to our perception, and that's giving us illogic. Therefore, we as a human society are screwed because we can't apply reason in an effective way. But Kant says, no, don't have that kind of attitude. Here's what he says about that. We shall not, therefore, be justified in evading the obligation of a critical solution of the questions of reason by complaining about the narrow limits of our reason, and by confessing under the pretext of humble self-knowledge that it goes beyond the powers of our reason. For all these questions refer to an object which can be found nowhere except in our own thoughts, namely the absolutely unconditioned totality of the synthesis of appearances. If we are not able to say and establish anything certain about this object from our own concepts, then we must not throw the blame on the object itself as concealing itself from us, for such an object, being nowhere to be found except in our ideas, can never be given to us. Instead, we must look for the real cause of this inability in our idea itself. The idea is a problem admitting of no solution, though we insist obstinately that a real object must correspond to it. So the solution lies in just knowing the reality of the situation. Look, like I'll repeat it again. There's a difference between how we perceive something and what something actually is. What something actually is, we can never really truly understand or comprehend it to its fullest extent or to its complete extent. We're only limited to our experiences. But again, our experiences, our senses of how we sense something as is not what something actually is. So we need to base our reasoning off of that foundation. I might perceive this woman to be not good in the workplace. However, she's really good in the workplace. So I shouldn't assume that this woman is bad in the workplace because she's actually good. So I need to adjust what I would normally assume to make solid and true conclusions of reality. You might look very different from me just superficially, race, gender, etc. But in reality, we're actually pretty similar. On the contrary, you look at somebody, you're the same race as me, we come from the same mold, we grew up in the same environment, we could understand each other. But, but the reality of the situation is, man, this guy is so different from me. I don't even know anything about this guy, right? Reason, pure reason, is a way for us to transcend our limitations of perception and our limitation of senses and get to truth. Understanding that just based off our senses alone, we can't really understand the truth of that. However, we can come to terms with that and use solid reasoning and grounded logic to make assumptions that are actually truthful. And in that way, I can start to do things that are actually meaningful, because now I'm working off of a foundation that's built off of truth. This is what I got from Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. I know it's probably not where Immanuel Kant was trying to come from. He was talking about it more on an abstract level and just like talking about reason as reason should be applied just in general terms. But the Black Ponder, this channel is about breaking it down into practicality. How can we use old school works like this and apply them to today's world? And I think you can. These type of works aren't outdated. You could these ideas are timeless. The fact that some people do consider this the most important philosophical text, I can see that. I can see that because he's talking about some very profound philosophical ideas that we should definitely consider. And, quite frankly, most people do not take these things into consideration, and they do limit themselves only on their senses and their perception based off experience, and they never really come to terms with the actual reality of the situation. And because we're unable to fully comprehend what that actual reality is, we tend to ignore it or dismiss it, like I did with the philosophy teacher. And that gets us in all types of trouble. I would argue that it gets us into trouble of things like sexism, racism, homophobia, things like that. Any type of discrimination, I think it's kind of rooted in this type of, in the dismissal of using reasoning to separate and comprehend and come to terms with the difference between something as it truly is and our perception of something. I would imagine that people would probably listen to me say this and they'd be like, that's not where Immanuel Kant was coming from at all. Like, you're kind of off here. But I would argue, like, I think the ideas that he presented, you could definitely apply them to where I'm trying to come to terms with. And I would also argue that that's why this work is so important. Should everybody read it? I don't know about that. I mean, it's pretty chunky and it's very wordy. There's a lot of terms, and it'll take you a while to read it. Not because it should take you a while to read it, because it's a lot of ideas in here, and it has nothing to do with you being how smart you are. You should take some time and process this. And it's a big, beefy text, and it has a lot of ideas that are relevant to today's world. So if you want to jump into this, I would invite you, go ahead, buy it, check it out at the library, read it. It's the Critique of Pure Reason by Immanuel Kant. It is definitely a very important philosophical work. Check it out. But I would like to thank you for tuning in to the Black Ponder. Until next time, I'll see you later.